Okay, our first meeting of 2025. January the 6th. And we may be joined by Ryan, who's our new screenwriter, and Val. We'll see. Maybe our new friends will come and a little bit late, and maybe not. But let's start with something I've been musing about. So we have this collection of stories called Natural Evolution. There are various versions. This route, that route. It's kind of up for grabs exactly how it works, but a number of sub theories are all following a basic truth, which is that via a long and tortuous but continuous trail from the very first unicellular organisms, there's a line that comes all the way naturally through natural process to Homo sapiens sapiens. And then there's you might say, competing collection of stories. And the truth of them is that, hi, Ryan. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, Mike.
Glad you're joining us.
Excited.
So I just for your benefit, I started saying that we have this collection of stories called Natural Evolution. Okay. And then the collection of stories called Creation. And their line of truth is that an omnipotent, again, these are varies, around the world, there were many different versions, but their line of truth is that either an omnipotent being or non-incarnate entities created Homo sapiens sapiens. And we have been considering a third story, which is that natural evolution worked up to a point that we call Homo erectus, and that species was modified by an advanced giant humanoid race. Well, there you are, Grace. Hi. That modified Homo erectus and made Homo sapiens. And that's the truth that we've been considering. Now, one of the many supportive realities, supportive of that, of our third story, is that it makes sense of how adamantly the proponents of creation and the components of natural evolution hold on to their story, and how adamantly they are convinced that the other side is totally wrong and maybe even delusional. And our tale has, I think, enhanced validity because it says, well, of course, they're both right. That's why they won't give up. They're both right to a point, to an extent. Another reflection on this is that story number one may contain story number two, which is to say that the bioenergetic infinite field of the universe is creative and contains templates, and many of the steps along the way of evolution were kind of suggested, by the field, not simply by the most recent species predecessor and conditions of that moment in time. Another thing that I find interesting about this is that these two opposing story collections are a good example of a universal principle, a dialectic principle, that a common functioning principle, in this case, what actually happened, splits into two opposing principles, two opposite, seemingly incompatible stories that are unified by their common functioning principle that they both spring from. Okay. Now, our problem is that belief, which is what people love to think, have gotten attached to. Um, Billions of people are connected to either story collection number one or story collection number two, and so story number three, the one that we're saying is really the key to our salvation, to understand it, is so disruptive of people's deeply held beliefs that it's going to be powerfully resisted. Um, um, and it's not just the origin story of humanity that would need to be revised, but a great deal of human history, a great deal of philosophy, an awful lot, have to be revisited and revised. So it's a huge upheaval that our, to us, convincing story, at least to me, so how do we deal with that? And one solution is to wrap difficult fact within interesting and enjoyable fiction. The syrup on the spoon, so to speak, that makes it easy for the medicine to go down. And that's the construct of the movie that is going to be coming forth one of these days, currently titled The Hybrids. I basically, that's you and me, um, um, and so a story that evolved with my friend, started with Joe McGloin, and then moved through David Shackler, who's departed, with the screenwriter Don Roth, and now very much in the hands of Ryan, who you're meeting now for the first time.
Hello. Nice to meet
Hello.
you.
So wrapping truth in fiction actually appears to be a very, very old ploy. Because the account in the tablets and the carvings from Mesopotamia appeared to be essentially true, but made comprehensible through simplification and condensation. In other words, they were packaged for human consumption, made comprehensible, because too much went on over too long a period of time, to sell the story, so to speak. Okay? And it seemed important for the Anunnaki, for humanity to have some understanding of how they got here, and who they were, and how that got buried in amnesia over the course of time, as a whole other story, why that had to happen, apparently. But civilized humanity, and the time of the various several sequential Mesopotamian cultures and the Egyptian ones, did have this story. They had the story accurately. So what do I mean by too much went on over too long a period of time? The chronology that I've been able to put together, I think it's mostly right, is that the mutiny of the Anunnaki miners which led to the authorization for Enki and Ninmah or Ninti to create to make the new mixed worker. That authorization came around 310 BCE. Now, the very first fossils of Homo sapiens neanderthaliensis, the Neanderthals, that's 250,000 BCE. So there's a 60,000 year gap there, you know. That's a long time from the start of the project to the first evidence, clear evidence we have of one of the works in progress. Now, actually, it probably went back a little further, but because the fossil evidence, and this is nice to have being discovered. The fossils are, you know, they are a type of evidence, but not the only one. And some recent stuff. This was in an article, a website that I've really gotten interested in called IFL Science. This was in late December, and they have a way. It's got a terribly long name, but of analyzing the results of fires. And apparently, over a period of 1,000 years, there were like 25 separate fires ignited in a particular cave in the southeast of France, you know, and around 270,000 years ago. So, you know, so humans were doing things, and these were fires that were apparently lit rather than burning grasses brought into this deep cave, because this occurred in a very wet period. Anyway, so we have this back to the story. We have this 60,000 year gap. Then the very first Homo sapiens fossils appear around 150,000 BCE. So there's there's 100,000 year gap opening up. Okay, you know, so a lot went on, and one reason to think that is that all of these subspecies that we can't quite put onto a tree, and for good reason, we can't put them on a single tree because they're all coming out of experiments going on in the lab. But they're the Denisovians, they're these the hobbit-like creatures in the Southwest Pacific. There's a very intermediate species that was found in a cave in South Africa with both very advanced characteristics in the skeleton and very primitive ones, you know. So it was a hodgepodge, you know. So it seems that a lot was going on in vivo, in other words, in combinations and experimentation, you know, in nature, and a lot was going on in vitro in ongoing laboratory work. That's my guess, you know, that just needed to be simplified and packaged in a coherent story, which Zechariah Sitchin pieced together, because this single story got broken up into thousands and thousands of tablets and pieces and fragments, you know, and so it took a genius intuition to put it together and say, this is real, this is a story. Okay. But of course, he had something of an ADD swirl going around, and his books are very hard to follow. So one of my contributions was to take, you know, his, to some extent, difficult to read and difficult to put together stories into one Mesopotamian tale, I call it. Anyway, so here's another piece of evidence of, you know, there was a lot going on. And this comes from an article in the website Medium just this month, just a few days ago. So the Neanderthals had very large skulls. Their brain case was about 250 cubic centimeters bigger than modern European humans. They had big noses as if they had to breathe cold air. They had light skin and red blonde hair and a robust physique. Now, the Homo sapiens sapiens um, were had dark skin. We know this. Okay, smaller stature, and were referred to, by the way, by the Anunnaki as the black-headed ones. They had dark hair. So it looks like this the Neanderthals, which I think are probably one of the last works in progress species. They were in some ways more like the Anunnaki than than Homo sapiens sapiens wound up to be. They had to back off or something like that, you know. Someday this will all, be sorted out both through genetic studies and more paleontology. By the way, the two species did interbreed around 50,000 BCE, plus or minus 5,000. But apparently that interbreeding was relatively rare because the European, modern European DNA is only 2% Neanderthal. Okay. So more on myths containing history, stories. Um, this another article from last month in IFL Science. Stories containing fact. The Pleiades, cluster of stars of about 1,000 stars. And there, by the way, there are, I don't give this too much credence, but there is a stream of thought in those who are concocting and believing, that we come from the Pleiades. Some people, I don't know what to make of that, but the thing about the Pleiades is there are 6 stars that are the brightest stars in the cluster. In ancient myth, there were 7 sisters in the Pleiades. The Greek story is that the Pleiades were the daughters of Atlas and Pleione. And in their story, Atlas, who was busy holding up the sky so he couldn't protect his daughters, from lustful Orion, who was after them. And so to save them from Orion, Zeus turned them into stars, turned them into the 7 sisters. The Australian Aborigines have a story that is very, very similar. There was a hunter who was chasing 7 females. Now that can't be coincidence, they have to have origin at the same time. But that time was 100,000 years ago. That's the last time that the population that wound up in Australia, was cohabiting Earth, along with those who moved into Europe. So what does that mean? Well, the origin of the story is somewhere in the range of 100,000 years ago, that the two populations carried with them over all that time. And there's a group, they weren't identified in this article, that ran a stimulation and found that around 100,000 years ago, approximately, one of the stars named Pleione, after the mother, moved closer to another star, Atlas, okay, coming so close that they were no longer distinct to the naked eye as two different stars. And so the seven became six. So it ties together very nicely. Um, so an astronomical fact, you know, um, becomes a world-spanning piece of fiction. Let that simmer for a while. Somewhere in Evolution Diverted, I do talk about this piece that comes to us through Saul Bellow. And I'll, this is an expansion of what's in the book. But here's the case of a writer of fiction sensing or intuiting fact and conveying it in the story that he writes. Now, it's not totally clear because we have to get inside the head of a guy who's departed to know whether he actually intuited this truth that I'm going to convey in a moment, or whether he was reinterpreting and retelling what he'd absorbed from reading other stories, from reading other myths. So that I don't know. But in Humboldt's Gift, the title of the novel, Bellow talks through two characters, a playwright who in the novel is often speaking about a poet, a deceased poet, who had been his mentor. And that's Humboldt. And the playwright recounts that Humboldt had this recurring theme in his poetry about a perennial human feeling that there was an original world, a home world that's lost to us. And that Earth is an insufficiently humanized imitation of that home world, making Homo sapiens sapiens a castaway species. Now, if this isn't out of the Mesopotamian tale, I don't know what is. And so here it is, surfacing, in a work of fiction. But even, even making the stew richer, the playwright goes on in this, the playwright voice of Saul Bellow goes on to quote a current, in other words, mid-20th century fascination with an idea that he, the character, doesn't particularly believe in, but there it is. People find this of some interest, and that idea that he's talking about but not really believing is that self-realization requires the embrace of the innermost being, and that healing depends on acceptance of humiliating truth that the unconscious contains. that's also our story. Um, you know, and again, here it is in concise form being offered for our consideration, in a many layered work of fiction. Um, that's very cool. Um,
I don't know how it works, but am I allowed to make a comment on something you said, or is there?
oh yeah, we're open.
Okay, I just wasn't
All
sure.
microphones are open.
But the description of the Bellows description, and kind of what you're talking about is art reflecting reality and what have you. There's a play from 2012 called Mr. Burns, a post-electric play that takes place in the post-apocalyptic future, and there's a small band of people who remember a single Simpsons episode, the Cape Fear episode, and they're just trying to remember what happened in it. The play flash forwards 75 years, where now, because of that original band, theater is big again in the world. And that group ends up, but now that they're performing the play, it's different from the original episode because it was based on that. And then it keeps going further and further ahead in time until this singular Simpsons episode has eventually turned into a sort of a heroic narrative like out of Homer, and it has allowed the society to rediscover electricity. So I think it very much touches on that archetype of how societies are formed, and people and civilizations.
Yes. Um, and that allows, that gives a perfect segue to the next piece I wanted to present to you. But yes, how things are passed on. Um, one of the problems that becomes an objection in certain minds, and it's an understandable objection. Um, um, how could the realities of life under the Anunnaki be so accurately and often painfully reproduced, over the centuries? How could we be doing it all over again, again and again and again and again? You and one way of attempting to explain that, say, well, you know, trauma, is transmittable, is contagious, you know, traumatization is. And then we have customs that get passed on, and then we have laws that get passed on, and we have stories that get passed on, So all of these are means of conveyance, but um, uh, they're not. The putting them all together is, to me, is helpful, but not totally convincing. There's something else going on, and the something else is hard for most, that I think is happening, is hard for most people to grasp, and that is that the bioenergetic field of the universe, the all, the source, whatever you maybe want to give it. Stay away from God; it's been overused. Uh, um, uh, Carries an imprint, carries memory. It serves as a template for future reality. Okay. This, by the way, is one of one of the aspects in to jump back several paragraphs, in natural evolution, that one of the things going on is the reception of information held in the field, okay, which by the way helps to explain some of the, almost like, how did nature do that? Findings of just impossible, seemingly impossible, evolved things. Well, the idea here is that it was suggested by the field. The field holds that possibility and suggests it to the biological entities. But how could that how can that happen? And I find it delightful that we have just had a minor, very minor manifestation, and it's one that escapes almost everybody except a weird mind like mine, and it isn't all that important really. However, it's a minor manifestation of this essential fact of transmission through the field, and here it is. So I got this while taking a walk on the morning of Christmas Eve, because I had just heard that there were some churches in the United States who for the last few years have been developing rituals, ceremonies. It's very fluid and it's very different from place to place and church to church, but they are celebrating Christmas Adam. Christmas Adam is the day before Christmas Eve. And of course, that makes sense because Adam comes before Eve. It's like, can you think of anything more silly, more superficial, kind of a dumb play on words? That you would, you start to develop traditions around, and like who knows, like where that episode from The Simpsons is going to wind up, where this one is going to wind up with, with Christmas Adam. But it's nowhere near as ridiculous as it seems, you know. Uh, and here's what I got while walking, through on a snowy trail. Um, Adam in Hebrew, in Book of Genesis, means earth or earthman. Okay, when you the blessing of over food out of the earth like potatoes, talks about ha'adamah from the earth. Okay. Eve, of course, in our language, we're thinking of it as, a derivative from evening. But Eve in the book of Genesis in Hebrew is Chava. You can see Chava to Eve. Well, it's not that far off. Okay? It's got a V in it, got a H or a CH. Chava means life, as in l'chaim, the life. Okay? So the mother and father of humanity, in the book of Genesis story, are earth and life. No, not totally weird to connect this with Christmas, the rebirth of the world, the birth of the new light, the two parents in the story, when it gets interesting is when we take the trail back to the Sumerian origins of the Genesis story and the two parents of humankind, the two makers, were Enki, Earth Lord, En meaning Lord, Ki meaning the planet Earth. Ki, by the way, is the root for Geo. Okay, anyway, Enki, Lord Earth, Earth Lord. Okay. And his sister has several names, but the one that is relevant here is Ninti. Nin means lady or great lady, and Ti means life. Earth Lord and Lady Life. Earth Man, Adam, and life, Hava. Okay. Then it gets to be even more fun because this was something that was found by a linguist in the 1920s. Sumerian was a language that, like, even much more strongly than ours. It takes place in English, but a word can have very different meanings in different contexts. And in Sumerian, T, well, meaning life, also means, guess what? Rib. So Lady Life is also Lady Rib, the source of that absurd, you know, misogynistic, piece of Genesis that has woman coming out of man's rib. Okay. Even more fun, Ninti had a association with one of the signs of the zodiac, as many of the highest Anunnaki lords did. A convenient way to keep the human population even more in awe of them. We are the representation of the sky beings. Okay. Um, and the sign for Ninti, Lady Life, was Virgo, the Virgin. Ta-da. So, so here are these, you know, um, basic facts of human origin, you know, bubbling up, you know, like lava through a new fissure in the crust, bubbling up in Christmas Adam, you know. It's like, wow, it's crazy, but it makes perfect sense. Ryan, there's a science fiction story um, a long time ago, but it's similar with a fragment of the destroyed
A candle
civilization.
for Leibowitz?
Yes, Canticle for Leibowitz.
Canticle for Leibowitz. Yes.
Yes, and in the Canticle for Leibowitz, civilization is destroyed, and it's clawing its way, and there was one of the artifacts that was found, were blueprints from a an engineer named Leibowitz, maybe Sam Leibowitz, whatever, So he had blueprints from, I think, it was some electrical apparatus, um, and he became Saint Leibowitz, you know, in the future civilization, you know, and the monks were copying his blueprints.
Another one that's similar now that we're talking about is the Kevin Costner movie The Postman, which was based on a novel of post-apocalyptic. Everything's gone and he is a traveling actor but decides to deliver a piece of mail and brings back the American spirit through has a rebel army of post people to take down the bad guy. It's a
Uh-huh.
fun movie. It was a giant flop, but I always thought it was fun. It's big. I mean, the scale that he does, great score, fun villain who just ended up being a Xerox salesman who has become the lord of this post-apocalyptic world. And has a great line of dialogue when someone tells him, "You hand out hope like it's candy in your pocket, postman."
There's there in one of the last Dune novels, or maybe the very last of the five, um, there's an in-joke of a piece of civilization being preserved, over tens of thousands of years, you know. Um, um, and there's a group that's discovered um, uh, in again, I forget whether they're important or completely peripheral group, but here's this group that's discovered, um, you know, praying together, again, this is like 150,000 years in the future, and it's a group of Hasidim, in their black hats, you know, you know, saying their prayers. Um, um, the funny part in Canticle for Leibowitz is the monks who are copying the blueprints, which, as you know, the blueprint is white lines on a blue background. That's why it's called a blueprint. Okay, and so for hundreds of years they are meticulously inking in these drawings, these electrical drawings, and leaving the white lines, so they're putting they're covering the parchment with ink and leaving the white lines that Saint Leibowitz drew, and then they discovered, oh my God, the blueprints are negative images. They were actually dark lines on white paper that were printed in reverse. you know um, and that's the in joke for that novel. um, um, but so we're doing with the hybrids, um, what's necessary and also traditional. It's the way to do it, um, and it's the way it's always been done. Mhm. Some lesser things have been popping up. Um, Thanks to AI, it isn't all evil, right? Um, uh, Hundreds more drawings have been discerned in the Nazca Desert in Peru, almost doubling the number of images that we can discern now. Um, but still, uh, nobody is coming up with uh, a theory of how they could be. Clearly they are made by the Anunnaki, um, either from the air with a beam device, because all of the drawings are made with one line. In other words, the entire figure is one, however complicated, it's one line that draws the entire thing. Okay. Either that or by a robotic vehicle controlled from the sky, that is tracing the figure. Because on the ground, you don't know that it's there. It's a simple trough drawn through the soil and exposing some subsurface soil that's in contrast to the surface soil, and that's how you have an image. But it is so big that when you're standing there, you know, you're completely unaware that there's an image that you're looking at, or that you're in the middle of, because you can't see it. So nobody, is making any sense out of this unless you have the ET hypothesis. Another piece of it that's recently uh, come through with the study is that the straight lines, which I'm not the only one, has said that can only be the blast trail from a vehicle taking off or landing, you know. But there's one of them that's just been found that's 15 miles, arrow straight. Can only be, an artifact of some advanced technology, whether it's a so-called UFO, unintentionally leaving a trail 15 miles long because it made a very low pass and created a trough, with its blast trail, wasn't taking off or landing, just happened to make a very, very long, low pass, and created an artifact. But, without an ET explanation, you can't make any sense out of this. You cannot, absolutely cannot. So as Linda Gooding put it in her foreword in the book, the evidence that's amassing is just enormous. And one day, the dominant paradigm is going to have to crack, because after a while you just can't ignore. There's a limit to how much you can ignore and how much you can avoid. Obviously, our recent election has demonstrated that the limit to what you can avoid and ignore is pretty high. But it's there, and there is a limit, and after a while, the misconception and the misperception, collapses. That's been true throughout history, and God help us, it will be proven true again. My words to your ears. Let's see.
Mike, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about sociological possibilities, and that so often, at least in my case, and possibly in your case, perhaps, educated people seem to think that change will come through the sciences or through scientific knowledge, a science-based kind of a knowledge group, a knowledge set. I wonder if that's really accurate nowadays. I mean, couldn't the changes come to an acceptance of a former ET presence, at least to explain some of these geological artifacts, is through high school students who just get onto it because it's more fun, and it turns out to be more accurate. And they inspire their teachers with questions. Well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And in the manner of ignorant high school students, they might not shut up, and it catches on with the internet or some form of the internet.
Well, it's true. Kids get it.
Well,
kids get the story very easily.
They kind of get, they don't have the resistances, and they like the fun.
Yes, yeah. Well, a friend of mine gave a capsule version of the Mesopotamian tale to his 6-year-old son, who said, "Well, sure, okay, that's how come we don't fit in, isn't it?" So maybe one of the things that what your thoughts suggest to me is, well, why don't we have if you can have Christian academies, why can't you have academies pitching the story? Why not start in kindergarten? Actually, I wrote a story which I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. It could easily become an animated short, but in this story, elementary school brother and sister, um, uh, stumble onto the persistent, the appearance of the number 12 all over the place,
Mhm.
in fact and in religion, and their grandfather explains, how come 12 is important, the 12 ruling gods,
Mhm.
the ruling circle of the Anunnaki lords. And then they get all excited about the story, Um, kids get it. My I mean, the weight of argument is essentially um, um, scientific, but it needs to be put together in a way that's humanistic. It needs to be told, even though the facts, the hard facts, are there, through the lens of science. I think that the cutting edge of 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 basically scientific reality, the cutting edge is in the arts. Because artists, kind of by nature, are exploratory, are not, um, when they're really cooking, they're not held down by tradition, or by rules, but they are exploring, and that's why, when I was able to, put put a story together and put it on stage for a video. Um, it was a cutting edge, um, musical venue where it was accepted. Where it could fly, because yeah, they got it. Um, um, uh, so it's a place where, art and science come together. Uh, a piece of autobiographical. Um, um,
If, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead,
I was
Brian.
just gonna, in terms of art and science, I think back, my background in theater, that the term robot came from a play called RUR from the early 20th century. So, and which it was about a robot. And so that is an example of a play, influencing and creating essentially, a lot of ways, an entire kind of scientific field.
Right, and in that case, the mind that picked up that possibility that was held in the ether, was a playwright.
Yep.
Um, so freshman week, 1959. We were asked to read and comment on a then somewhat popular book amongst the elite, called The Two Cultures by C.P. Snow. And it was, the culture of science, the culture of the sciences and the culture of the humanities, and how come they didn't talk to each other very well. And one of my brain's children at the time, in my little contribution, was that, what grieves the humanists, is that, they don't have any unifying theories, like relativity, or Newton's laws of gravity. They don't have any all-encompassing theories. They just, throwing it all together. You know, and that's a great frustration, of, and maybe even source of shame, for the humanists. Um, and lo and behold, um, 60 plus years later, um, here's this all-encompassing theory, which doesn't explain everything, but explains a hell of a lot, you know. Um, and um, it does really pull together um, story, literature and science. Um, so maybe the two cultures can finally shake hands. Um,
Unfortunately, I have to step out. I have to get on to
oh yes, you
daughter
had
to therapy. So I'm taking her next week to Universal, which she's dying to go next Monday, so I won't be able to join. But then I'll be able to make regular appearances. This has been fascinating.
it's once a month.
Oh,
Usually,
oh, that's perfect. Okay.
it's the first
Okay.
Monday. First Monday.
Great. It was wonderful to meet you all.
And we're gonna be signing off because
Oh, okay. Well, then
unless anybody else got something, because I'm out of gas. Okay, thanks all.